Thank you, Vicki. Thank you. Many Unitarian Universalists are not exactly religious in the way most religious people use that term. We tend toward a rational and scientific outlook. At one point, a few generations back, our rational and iconoclastic tendencies grew a bit extreme as we went smashing through old dogma and repressive traditions. We challenged anything that had the whiff of ritual or ceremony. We would not be saddled with empty symbolism and meaningless sacrament. We would not be told what to do or what to believe. Thank you very much. More recent generations have a more tempered perspective about ritual and other embodied spiritual practices. Over the past few decades, we've been lighting chalices in worship, doing check-ins at meetings, lighting candles during the time of joys and sorrows. I remember attending an installation service for an elder colleague almost 25 years ago now. He had begun his ministry back in the 70s, and the good reverend was being installed as the new minister in a nearby church. The service was underway, and it was suddenly clear that the person who was going to light the chalice was not in the room, probably stuck in traffic instead. The lead minister looked around the room and shrugged and said, "Let's just skip that part." And they did. I remember at the time feeling unsettled by the dismissal of the chalice lighting. I like ritual and I appreciate its value. It was unsettling for me, not because I thought it was sacrilege or irreverent, but because if you're going to have a symbol present and a ritual planned around that symbol, then you should follow through with it. If it's unimportant or meaningless, something that you can just skip over, then why bother including it in the first place? Here's what I think has shifted in Unitarian Universalism. It wasn't so much that in the past we didn't want ritual or religious ceremony and that now we do. It was a refusal of empty ritual and meaningless ceremony. We didn't want to be going through the motions just because that's the way it had always been done, or here's this newfangled thing that all the kids are doing. The rituals ought to mean something, and they ought to mean something of value to us. Today, the act of lighting the chalice is seen as a meaningful and important part of our weekly gathering, as it is for many Unitarian Universalists. Many of us have found our faith after having left a previous religious tradition. The departure is typically around a disconnect with values and beliefs. When we talk about rituals and ceremony now, it's important to notice that for many people who grew up in a different tradition, those traditional rituals and ceremonies, while comforting, were done in the service of those values and beliefs that no longer fit. And by association, those rituals and ceremonies no longer fit or offer comfort. In the reading this morning from Jennifer Hecht, in her new book, The Wonder Paradox, we heard the author frame our question for non-religious people, for folks who refuse the supernatural, asking, what about those useful, comforting aspects of religion? Must we refuse those as well? Can non-religious people have some meaningful rituals in our lives and still have our integrity of belief or non-belief? We Unitarian Universalists ask a similar question with a nuance. We have among us atheists and seekers who hold a non-supernatural outlook. But that's not all we have. We have pagans and people who practice an earth-centered spirituality who see the supernatural saturating our natural world, or if supernatural is not an accurate term, at least something more than what science calls natural, saturating our natural world. And some of the theists among us will frame their belief as fully natural, while others do not. So we ask questions similar to what Hecht is asking in her book, but with certain nuances of pluralism among us. Hecht's book carries a delightful subtitle that I want to share: The Wonder Paradox, Embracing the Weirdness of Existence and the Poetry of Our Lives. Life is weird. Poetry helps. Her answers are in poetry. Many Unitarian Universalists have long agreed with this sort of answer. Poetry can carry quite profound layers of meaning in some cases, and it can bring quite poignant comfort in some cases as well. Poetry can challenge us. It can get us thinking. It can stir us up. It can soothe our spirits, help us feel a deep connection. And delightfully, Hecht urges us to use poetry in a ritualistic manner. She calls us to develop ritual patterns for using the poetry, to use poetry in the way that religion uses prayer and scripture and liturgical readings. She suggests poetry as a form of meaning-making and a path for comfort amidst the vagaries and weirdness of life. Did your friend invite you to their wedding? Have you read Gaum Daosheng's poem, The You and I Song? Did someone in your life just have a baby? There's a great poem by Rumi that says you were born with wings. Did you just bump into Earth Day on the calendar? Try reading Joy Harjo's When the World as We Knew It Ended. Are you worried about the fraying social contract in our society? Check out Maya Angelou's excellent poem, Still I Rise. Did you just have a brush with mortality and begin pondering the meaning of it all? Go read A Mother in a Refugee Camp by Chinua Achebe and read it again. And then read it again. Hecht's book is really a guidebook for crafting your own anthology and practice, a liturgy, both intimate and authentic, because you made it yourself. Last week I spoke of the importance of community. Many people of whatever theological stripes recognize the power and importance of religious community. Today we talk about ritual, and I take my lead from Jennifer Hecht this morning. I want to open us up to the conversation of ritual in a manner that is fitting, that serves. Think about our time of joys and sorrows. The obvious ritual pieces are lighting the candles, reciting the phrase, "You are in our hearts," as a response to each sharing. If you're newer to our congregation, I would like you to know that this ritual and these pieces of that ritual has been crafted over several years of conversation together. There were times when Joys and Sorrows was even a little problematic among us. People shared on topics that were inappropriate. People would go on and on and on too long with their sharing. It felt like the time needed a slightly better definition to help it be the rich and potent ritual we knew it could be. We started tinkering with it. We adjusted the opening instructions several times, trying to find the balance between lighthearted and stern, descriptive and prescriptive. We tried not lighting candles, but dropping stones in water instead. We heard a big no to that one. We tried having everyone write out their joys and sorrows in a book that I would then read, instead of letting everyone come up individually. We tried adding different responsive phrases for after each person had spoken, and we went through a handful of different phrases. Hecht would recognize our use of poetry to help the experience become a better ritual. We arrived at our current model a few years ago, and then when the pandemic hit, The whole show was turned upside down again. During the shutdown, we had no candles, no individual sharing, no responsive phrase that we would all repeat over Zoom as if we could. And one person would read out all the offerings at the end of the service following the postlude, which was a very pragmatic solution, allowing everyone plenty of time to write their joys and sorrows throughout the hour in the chat. So we still had the sharing, and it was still meaningful. But most of the ritual was drained from it while we were in lockdown. I think the experience clarified for many people, for me at least, the value of the ritual part of it. We know there's a reason behind the ritual that we do. It's not empty. It's not meaningless. Rituals are meant to be doorways into experiences. But they are not meant to be the experience, just the entrance into it. Rituals open us up into deeper realities. Those deeper realities exist with or without the ritual. Now, unfortunately, ritual can also exist with or without a connection to the deeper realities. Thus, they can become meaningless and empty rituals. But when the connection is true, rituals serve as that doorway to meaningful spaces. Rituals are something we enact. We have bodies. A significant part of what is happening in a ritual is that we're not merely thinking about it and about what it means. We're also enacting it. Our bodies are participating. Anyone who has done sports or dance, martial arts, yoga, weightlifting, will recognize what I mean when I say our bodies have a form of knowing, of wisdom. Maybe it's more accurate to say that our bodies have a connection to our brains that is different from what we usually just call thinking, right? Our bodies carry a memory and a wisdom. So showing up, going through the steps, lighting the candles, ringing the bells, bowing down, saying the words, closing our eyes, sitting in silence. The actions we take with our bodies opens us, serves as an entrance point. It is the doorway into the spaces of meaning and value. The rituals must be embodied. They must be embodied. Hecht, in her advice to non-religious people yearning for comfort and meaning, it's not simply to go find a good poem. That's not what she's saying. She's telling people to read the poem out loud, to find a particular place to read the poem out loud, to read the poem out loud again in that same space a year later, a month later, a day later. In other words, enact it, embody it. In many ways, what Hecht is suggesting for an individual is similar to what we are doing as a community together in this congregation. Our community's rituals are enacted in our bodies. It's not enough to only share our joys and sorrows we learned. When we do it in the worship service together, we need to do it embodied so that it will really work well. So we light the candles and we respond with some small slip of poetry to each other. You are in our hearts. We don't mean that scientifically. We mean it poetically. We light our chalice, and each week we say different words. But the words are important. They are a small poem of words that we say to mean something, ritual and reason. We extinguish it each week and recite the same poem every week. We have our covenant and doxology words that we do the same every week. We sing Spirit of Life together most weeks. I know people have memorized some of these things. I had a spirituality professor say she didn't like to say that it was learned by rote. She said, learned by heart. These words are on your heart. It can turn into a reciting. It's good to stop every now and then and really consider the words. Do you mean them? Later, when we're extinguishing the chalice and we say those words that we say every week, are they still connected to values you actually hold? Is there integrity in the ritual and the ceremony for you? Ritual and reason. The doorways ought to take you somewhere of value, somewhere meaningful. May the words of our mouths, the meditations of our hearts and minds, lead us deeper into the mysteries and realities that uphold life, that we may live within our integrity and thrive together in life abundant. In a world without end, may it be so. Let us join